welcome to today's Shocktober 2020 episode. I am your host, Jeremy Meyer. Okay, so this is one I've been wanting to see for a long time. This goes back to when I was a kid in my hometown where I grew up. We had a local video store that was walking distance from my house. And, I was a young kid, 5, 6, and I lived in a very small town, so everybody knew everybody. So it was not really a big deal for me to walk across town to the video store by myself and go rent a movie and bring it home. And I definitely rented movies that I should not have been allowed to rent. I definitely remember renting RoboCop by myself, but everybody knew my parents and they didn't care. So yeah, 5, 6-year-old kid, take this R-rated movie and go home on your merry way. Have a great time. But I loved just browsing the video store. They also rented like Nintendo games, so that was fun for us. But I was always fascinated with just looking at the covers of the horror films. Like horror movies, terrified me as a kid. Now it's one of my favorite genres, so much so that I want to dedicate an entire month to podcasting about it every day. But at the time, I was super afraid of horror movies. I remember some of the earliest movies that scared me, like Halloween, Return of the Living Dead, things like that I saw way too young. But I remember just looking at a lot of the covers in the store, and Psycho 2 and 3 were always on the shelf, and it just always leaped out at me before I even knew anything about Psycho. Just those 80s VHS covers were always super compelling to me. Cut to years later, Alfred Hitchcock is one of my favorite directors. Vertigo is one of my favorite movies of all time, but so is Psycho. And I actually covered Psycho 2 years ago, maybe 3, maybe the first Shocktober I did. I can't remember. But I covered it in one of the other Shocktober episodes. And it was actually my first time watching the movie all the way through, I believe. I had seen tons of bits of Psycho over the years. And but this was the first time where I actually sat down and watched the whole thing. And I love Psycho. It's just amazing filmmaking. So I've always been curious about the sequels, especially Psycho 2 comes almost 20 years later, and it's just you see that a lot nowadays. Obviously Star Wars, we got episode 7 20 however many years after. I mean, episode 1 I think was 20, 30 years after the originals, but you see that now. But back in the 80s, I don't think that was as common of a thing. And I had always just kind of written them off all those movies are probably garbage. They're not even directed by Hitchcock. How good could they be? And then finding out over the last few years, I'd always been kind of growing more curious. Maybe I should watch them. And then a couple internet sites that I follow started doing kind of retrospective reviews on them. And it's it kind of sounds like these movies are better than I think they are. And I was recently browsing Half Price Books, and I found a 4-pack of Psycho 2, Psycho 3, Psycho 4, and then the Bates Motel pilot that they did for a failed TV show that they then just released as a TV movie. And by this time I had seen Psycho multiple times. I had actually marathoned all, 5 seasons of Bates Motel, and that's now one of my favorite shows. I actually think that show's super great. It's on Netflix if you haven't watched it. Definitely watch all of Bates Motel. But so this year it was kind of my excuse. Okay, let's sit down. Let's watch the Psycho movies. So I'm actually going to cover Psycho 2, 3, and 4. I don't know if I'm going to watch that Bates Motel thing. I might, and just talk about it a little bit, but by then I might be psychoed out, so we'll see. So today we're going to talk Psycho 2, and the synopsis is, after 22 years of psychiatric care, Norman Bates attempts to return to a life of solitude, but the specters of his crimes and his mother continue to haunt him. The movie is directed by Richard Franklin, written by Tom Holland, who would go on to do Child's Play and things of that nature. Would have his own prolific career. This movie is incredibly fascinating and actually very good. I honestly think you could do a whole documentary on what was going on behind the scenes to get this movie made. One thing that is interesting to point out is you do have a few returning characters and actors from the original movie. So we have Anthony Perkins obviously returning as Norman Bates, and Vera Miles comes back as Lilia Crane, who is now married or was married to the character of Loomis from the original movie because her last name is Loomis. And so that's super interesting. You know, you bring back these actors for, I mean, obviously Norman Bates, you kind of can't do it without him. Anthony Perkins, I should say. But bringing back Vera Miles is really good. And they tie it in and I will definitely talk spoilers on this movie just to give a little bit of a heads up. But the whole cast is really great. Like all the new people they bring in. Meg Tilly is incredible as the female character they bring in. Robert Loggia was really good as the doctor in the movie. Hugh Gillen, who plays the sheriff, and he actually appears in Psycho 3 as well. He's super fun in both of these movies. The cast is all really good, and what I would love to know about the movie is why they decided to make it. I definitely think it could just be like, hey, the slasher genre is huge now. Why don't we dust off this property we have and maybe make some money off of it? Which sounds like an exploitative move, and that could very well be exactly what happened, but I have no idea. And the thing about the movie is that they actually wrote a good follow-up to Psycho and like a good follow-up to the character of Norman Bates, because he is the heart of the story. And one thing to point out about the original film is Norman Bates is a character who is kind of sympathetic. Like, it's established in the movie that he is this way because of torture and trauma in his life. And while he is the villain of the movie, he is also kind of a victim. And this movie leans heavily into the idea of him being the victim, because he is the main victim of the second film. So the whole concept is, Norman Bates comes back from the hospital, and Lilia Crane, she just assumes like, oh, well, he's just crazy. He killed my sister in that shower and he just needs to be locked up again. And there's all these things and people messing with him and egging him on of like, come on, you crazy person, just do it. We know you want to pick up that knife and stab me. And him just trying to be like, no, I don't want to be that person. And it's honestly a better look at like mental health than movies like The Joker try to be. You just feel for Norman throughout the entire film. He's trying his best to just be a good person, but he feels like the world just wants him to be who he was before, and he doesn't want to do that. And it's kind of interesting that, you could definitely look at the movie. As I said, it probably was just like, hey, let's try to cash in on the slasher franchise. We'll make a sequel to the movie that basically started the genre. And it's endearing that they didn't just turn it into some stupid slasher movie. Like, there's not that many people that die in the movie. I think there's only 5 people that die in the entire film, which is kind of a lot for movies. Like, I think even in the original Psycho, there's only like 2 people that are dead, or that are killed on screen anyway. But yeah, like, there's not a lot of like murder in the movie. It is more of like a psychological thriller, which I kind of like. And obviously, like, we know the deal with Norman Bates in this film, so there's a lot of push and pull on like, is he crazy? Is he hearing his mother? And blah, blah, blah. And from this point on, I'm going to be talking spoilers. So if you don't want to have the movie spoiled, then just go see the movie. Like, honestly, it's really good. It's probably pretty cheap to find. Like, I found this at half price books for like $7. Had all of them in it. I highly recommend, and I'll spoil a little bit. Psycho 3 is also worth watching, so you're getting something for your $7. Uh, but yeah, so spoilers. So the whole idea here is that Lilia Crane is trying to drive Norman crazy, and Meg Tilly is actually her daughter, and that's like the thing that gets revealed later on. Like Meg Tilly, she seems to be a person who, oh, she's just trying to be nice to Norman because Norman's being nice to her, but then turns out, oh no, there's actually something going on here, and she ends up like kind of flipping sides. Like she just sees that Norman's trying to be better, and she now hates her mom for trying to drive Norman crazy. Like, oh, just leave him alone and he won't be a problem. Like he doesn't deserve all this. And it's a nice, fun twist to it, but it eventually becomes too late, and Norman kind of reverts back to his old self. Like they succeed in driving him crazy, but then he ends up getting away with it, which is kind of an interesting aspect of it. And you know, he's made to look like the victim, which he is the victim, but by the end of the movie, he's turned back to who he was. And then there's the added twist of his mother was not really his mother, but this other older woman who like kind of only shows up in the beginning of the movie, is revealed to be his real mom. But then the most incredible scene happens where she's sitting on a chair, like revealing all this to him, and he just picks up a shovel and smashes her on the head with it, and it like breaks the chair she's sitting in, and then he sets her up in the window, and that's his new mother now. And the last shot is kind of the cover of the movie of him standing at the stairs with the mother in the window, and you know, he's back to where he was. And you know, it's a dark ending where our main character is just fallen back into a bad place, and you know, you just want to root for Norman. And some of the characters are like, you get the feeling that the sheriff is rooting for Norman even in the next one. You know, that's a big part of it, but unfortunately it's just the outside forces are too strong and he just can't handle it. I really enjoyed this movie. I will gladly watch this again, and definitely like a back-to-back watch with the first one would actually be a lot of fun. Anthony Perkins is really good in the first movie and this one, and you can definitely tell how vulnerable he seems in the second one. I highly recommend Psycho 2. But that's going to be it for today's Shocktober. I don't really have anything else to say about the movie, so just go see it. Find a way to watch it. It's on iTunes. You can rent it anywhere. Just find a way to watch it. It's a really good movie. You can also find our Patreon at patreon.com/shelved, and shout out to our one Patreon producer, Patrick, so far. You can also find our merch store below the collar, or on our social medias. You can find links to it there, which our social media is at Shelved Podcast on everything, you know, Twitter, Instagram. I think that's pretty much all we got right now. But check back tomorrow, where we're going to talk about the next sequel in the Psycho franchise. The Psycho franchise, kind of stuttered that a little bit. But we're going to be talking about Psycho 3 tomorrow. So be sure to check back for that. And thanks for enjoying the episode.